And we're live.
Okay. All right, we are live. Gonna just let everybody kind of introduce themselves, go around the table. We're gonna be talking about Gamergate today. The reason that I wanted to host this and talk about this is during this entire Gamergate discussion, I felt like there really hasn't been a discussion. Both sides seem to be yelling past one another or not talking about it at all. And so I thought this would be a good forum to get some people together from different areas of the industry, different members of the press, and just sort of talk about what's been going on, and what we can do from there. So maybe we could start with Greg and just everybody introduce themselves and kind of what you do.
Sure. I'm Greg Tito, editor-in-chief of The Escapist, and I'm here, and thank you for asking us to to join this podcast stream, Eric. It is a good chance to be able to talk about these issues a little bit more frankly than we could possibly at our own outlets. So that's great. I look forward to the discussion.
All right, and Janelle.
Hi, I'm Janelle Bonanno. I'm editor-in-chief of Gamefront.com. Unfortunately, I'm the only audio-only person here because my webcam is acting up, but it's a pleasure to have you all join us today.
And John.
Hi, my name is John Bain, also perhaps better known on the internet as TotalBiscuit. I run CynicalBrit.com, which is primarily a PC critique YouTube channel.
All right, and yeah, thank you all for being here. I thought we'd just start off by kind of talking a little bit about what Gamergate is, kind of how we see this consumer movement, or whatever you want to call it, as having started, and its genesis, and kind of what it means now. And I thought maybe we could just start with you, Greg. Talk a bit about how you see Gamergate and the surrounding issues.
Sure. Well, Gamergate is a term that's been used to kind of subsume a whole lot of things, and I'm not sure if putting a label on it like that is the best method. I think it's been a way to, organize people around that hashtag on Twitter, and I think that is positive. But there's been a lot of easy dismissal of people as being, pro-GG or anti-GG, and the lines have been drawn between, the kind of populist movement of people who want video games to be a certain way, and what they perceive as, the people in the White Towers, such as, video game journalists, not thinking that. And I just want to say that I don't think creating a dichotomy like that is a good thing. I think having it be an us versus them situation ends up being a really negative thing overall. I don't want us as gamers to think that there are these black and white sides, that you're either with us or you're against us. And that kind of rhetoric, I think, harkens back to a lot of really horrible things in human history, and creating those situations allows people to feel justified in all kinds of evil things. So the reason why I wanted to join this discussion was just, frankly, because it was a discussion. It was us being able to talk about some of the issues that were brought up by some of the people who were in that hashtag, and talk about it as professionally and courteously as we could. So that's what I think about it, and hopefully that's what I hope people remember this whole period as a way to go forward.
Janelle?
I mean, I agree completely with what Greg said. Gamergate is a movement that encompasses a lot of ideals, right? There are a lot of different things going on there, and that is attracting people to the cause that they are all subsiding or subscribing to. And I think, there's a lot of things going on there, so it's hard to define exactly what Gamergate is without alienating individuals. There are some people who are there, part of the Gamergate movement, who are looking at journalistic standards and ethics, and there's part of the people who are there looking at other factors. And I think all of them come together in a way where, you know, as Greg said, we need to eliminate the sides and the lines and really look at the positive aspects that are coming out of it and trying to formulate a plan as to how we're going to address those issues.
Yeah, I think the idea of the Gamergate hashtag kind of as a movement in and of itself is a response to the fact that the way that this issue is being addressed and the means that people have at their disposal is very, very asymmetrical. You've got on, I'm not going to call it sides or anything like that, but you have people that can write articles on websites that have fairly large audiences. You also have people on Twitter that have a lot of followers. And then you have the consumers that generally don't really have power outside of numbers. And as a direct result, what you end up seeing is people will band together sort of out of necessity. And as you mentioned, it's very much a melting pot of ideals, but it also appears to be a leaderless consumer revolt, meaning that without leadership, it's very hard to define it as one thing specifically. And as a result, it's also folly to try and label it and decry it as one particular set of ideals, which we have seen going on. And I firmly believe that to do that is to push alienation. And alienation, if we want to talk about human history, as Greg brought up, leads to radicalization, always, all the time. And if we truly believe in inclusiveness, then the first thing to do, of course, is to listen and focus on issues rather than focus on people.
Okay. So, when we talk about it this way, it seems Gamergate seems pretty mild. We're talking about something that the way we're discussing it, how could it be controversial at all, really? But it is controversial. Why is this so controversial? Why do we have people criticizing Gamergate as an anti-feminist movement? Why do we see people likening Gamergate to ISIS and so forth? Where does that come from?
I think it comes from the fact that what John just said, like the alienation and extremism can be used by anybody. Anybody can use those tactics to make your position seem stronger and weaken the position of everyone around you. And I see that being used. It's happening with this controversy, but it also is happening as an endemic thing in our culture right now, all around. That people try to paint their political opponents or just someone who disagrees with them as not worthy of support or even listening to them to possibly see their side. And this is something that I wrote in my editorial addressing kind of this idea that gamers were dead. When I rejected that notion, I was like, oh no, I don't think that's true at all. I am a gamer, and I think there's a lot that games can do to positively change people and their viewpoints, because it is an empathic art form. You are embodying the characteristics and the experiences of someone else, more so than passive entertainment, than movies or TV. Where you're just you're just absorbing it. You are actually acting on things in games, and I really wish that people would use those characteristics of the medium that we love so much and think about the other side. Think about not the other side, but think about people who are different from they are and their experiences that they're going through, and think about the other person on the other side of the screed of all caps that you just spewed into Twitter. How does that make you feel? How would that make you feel if it happened to you? And it's I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm a terribly religious or Christian person, but I really believe in, doing to others as you would have done to you. And I think games can really help that, can help you really think about that idea a lot more. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit echoiness, so that's why I'm starting to feel a little odd there.
A little self-conscious. You don't want to hear your own voice come back to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That can be a scary thing. I think it's maybe important to frame the discussion of why it is that Gamergate is seen as a negative by some people by looking at the origins of it and talking a little bit about the history of it. And the way that I interpret that, and I'd love to hear everyone else's interpretation of this as well, is that it started with a person by the name of Zoe Quinn and accusations of journalistic issues, corruption with involving Zoe Quinn in particular. However, after that, it moved on to general focus on journalistic ethics. And I think that that came about, and frankly, that petrol was poured upon what was otherwise a set of glowing embers by a huge number of articles released within the same sort of 24-hour period that all peddled a very particular narrative. A narrative so specific that it's quite hard to believe that each writer came to that conclusion on their own without discussing it at least in some way with a few others. It's especially true considering that they often linked to each other as well. And these articles, as Greg mentioned, they use the terminology "gamers are dead," and I can see the point that some of them were trying to make. I think a lot of people bring up Lee Alexander's article as one of the more egregious examples of it. And some people would make the argument that, yeah, her points were valid. You're talking about the idea that the games are for everyone and they're beyond simply appealing to one particular demographic. That's something I can get behind. But you don't encourage inclusiveness and diversity by condemning the primary demographic that games currently hold. And I feel that that article really did that, and that, along with the other articles, really set the fire going that is continuing to burn, it would appear, to this day. But the origins of it allowed some people to frame it, and since websites, large websites, have actually been pushing this narrative as well, to frame it as a misogynistic movement, which really, considering the current state of affairs, makes very little sense when most of the criticism seems to be leveled at websites which are staffed primarily by cis white males.
Janelle, do you have a take on this? I don't know, as a female games writer and gamer, is there some basis to this idea that there is some misogyny in the Gamergate movement or in the beginning of the Gamergate movement?
Well, there's definitely harassment going on. And you know what? There are many, this happens, I used to work in politics, and this happens in the political field all the time. And I feel like this Gamergate movement very much mirrors grassroots political uprisings that happen. Many topics and hobbies that have a subset of enthusiasts that just approach fanaticism in terms of their point of view. And what happens with their interactions with other people is that they actively try to squelch others with different points of view. In politics, you'll see this all the time. Now, you know, passion is great. Passion is what drives us to do great things in our industry. But passion and fanaticism can also manifest its way in incredibly shitty ways. So when it comes down to, you know, using your activism for harassing, you know, other females, players in the industry, harassing anyone in the industry, forcing people to try to shut up in certain ways, you know, that is where a small subset of people will really take it. I want to stress, like, when it gets to any group, it's very hard to look at a group of people and sort of generalize them. And whenever you do that, you almost always end up being wrong. It's like in politics when you say, you know, all liberals are X or all conservatives are Y. You always miss people, and you only end up catching the loudest of the group. So yes, I mean, there are a small subset of people who are using this movement or in some way are part of this movement in a way that's negative. But we have to look at the full context of what's going on today, not necessarily what's how Gamergate started or what its precursors were, because there are many more people that are currently involved than there were a month ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that, frankly. It really comes down to focusing on issues, and if you focus on the issues, then you starve of oxygen those that would seek to co-opt a movement for the purposes of harassment or violence or pushing a particularly extreme point of view. And by listening to the issues and discussing them like adults, you make sure that you don't alienate more people and end up radicalizing more people who just out of frustration start to feel angry that they're consistently being ignored.
Yep. And you're seeing that on if we're going to talk about sides of Gamergate, which I hate to do because I feel like there shouldn't be sides.
It's a fallacy, right?
Yeah, but you see people acting in the same way. You see toxic people have that effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, number one, when you see toxic behavior, it feels like it's everywhere. That ends up being the predominant voice that you feel, that you hear, that you see, and it creates toxic behavior on the other side as well. So you're seeing toxicity and negativity begetting toxicity and negativity, and it's just creating an echo chamber, if you will, that is sort of muddling any sort of good that can come out of this. That if people would just sit and listen to each other and have a conversation, I think a lot of good can come out of this. Because what's happening in the Gamergate controversy, I would love to see happen, in other industries in some aspects, the positive sides.
Yeah, it's going on something that you said there. I almost think of it like a sporting event. If you've ever been really emotionally invested in a baseball game, for example, and you're screaming and yelling, and you have your emotions and your adrenaline is pumping, and you're sharing that experience with all of the people in the the stadium with you, as well as people who are watching it everywhere, and this great sense of community comes, and you feel negative and toxic against the other team, but it's a metaphor. It's not like you're really going to hurt them. And obviously, in sporting events, sometimes hooliganism does kind of creep into things, and that's where it gets wrong. And I feel like that's what is happening in this situation in the Gamergate hashtag, is that everybody's getting so emotionally charged and adrenaline is flowing, and not realizing that these these are real things and real issues that are at stake, and it's not a game. This is not a metaphor. This is actually things that are really happening and hurting people.
It's actually fantastic that you brought up hooliganism, because early on when this all started and I started to see condemnation of various sides, the only thing as an Englishman that I thought of was football hooliganism.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that a very, very small group of effectively psychopaths were involved in football-related violence. They even formed groups called firms. There's movies about this stuff. Yeah. And but we didn't condemn football fans for the actions of firms, because they don't represent firms. They don't represent the millions of fans of the game, which is exactly the same way as I view gamers. We have over 100 million gamers on Steam of all creeds, colors, genders, political orientations, whatever you may please. And I view trying to group them into one little box to be the most intellectually dishonest nonsense that I can possibly imagine. It is deliberately divisive strategy, and I'm sure Janelle could tell you about that when it comes to the political field. It's a cornerstone of the way politics often operate.
So one thing that I'm curious about, I can understand why media outlets didn't really want to touch on the Zoe Quinn story.
Yeah.
I can understand that. I didn't really want to either. But as this evolved and changed, and it's really moved way beyond Zoe Quinn, why has there been such radio silence? I mean, I think that's one of the recurring things you hear from people that support Gamergate, is that nobody in the games media is talking about this. If they do talk about it, they're talking about it with hostility or dismissiveness. Why, if there is this opportunity for a positive dialogue to occur, why is it not happening more? Why is it not more widespread within these outlets? What's going on?
Well, I can only speak for the Escapist as far as what our desires and editorial stance is. But I think that we recognized early on that discussing these issues was more important. Providing a forum for some of these things was more important than the possible negatives. And let me be honest, there have been many negatives that have sprung up from the Escapist, allowing Gamergate threads to populate on our forums. A lot of negative things that I'm frankly embarrassed about some of the things that are written on my website. But I chose to use my power to allow there to be a discussion in a place that I knew was going to be moderated in a way that could avoid some of the worst things. Now there definitely are some posts on there that verge on things you wouldn't want to read in mixed company or anything like that. But that being said, I think that a lot of the reluctance to discuss this comes from a general toxicity in the internet to begin with. I mean, John can tell you about YouTube comments. I can talk about comments on my reviews that were different from what many gamers thought. I will hold my hand up. I really like Dragon Age 2. I gave it 5 stars, and I still, to this day, 3 years later, will get people private messaging me, whenever it's meant. I mean, I've kind of owned it at this point, and I'm mentioning it now.
You're disgusting, Greg.
I know, I'm a horrible person. But people will say that. They will say those things, John, and it's like, as a creator, sometimes it's easier to ignore that cavalcade of negativity. Sometimes it's easier just to say, okay, these people don't like me. I'm not going to listen to them. I'm not going to give them the power to make me feel like crap. And that's a tactic. It really works. It sometimes is the only thing that can work, is to ignore. And I think some of that desire to not feel like crap is part of the reason why some people don't want to engage with what they see as a very vocal minority, very similar to the comments that we receive on our websites on a daily basis. The difference here, I think, is that this movement had some actual criticism and some actual points, and that's where the Escapists chose to listen to them and try to react to those points and move forward. Those were the ethics of journalism, the disclosures of possible conflicts of interest and all those things. And we've really worked hard to make sure that those were not there. Or if they were there, that we were disclosing everything that was happening. But beyond that, I can see that other outlets who have ethics policies already in place, there's no need for them to change this, and honestly, they have, through whatever corporate structure that's not under their control, they don't have the specific conflicts of interest that, say, the Escapists did. So just the fact that they're not disclosing a conflict of interest that doesn't exist doesn't mean that they're any worse or less, or less ethical. It just means that they don't have them, and actually that's a good thing. And I think this is something that I really wanted to address in this thing, is that this level of harassment and abuse that we've seen against all kinds of people in the industry, I'm not saying there's not any one target, but all of that does is create fear. It creates a desire to not be a target. So you get people the only people who are able to speak on this topic are those who have the courage to do so. And that doesn't mean that the people who don't speak up are not good people. They just, they're just afraid, honestly. And that's why I've been trying to reduce the amount of harassment and abuse that I see, to think about the other person and the immense amount of just, gumption it takes to say what you think in a public space. Some people aren't equipped for it. Some people want to just be able to write articles about video games and do that. And that doesn't mean that they're like I said, better or worse. It just means that they're not equipped to deal with the amount of vile and hatred that's thrown at them all the time. And I think that's kind of sad. I want that to end. I want there to be less vile hatred in the world. And I don't think that's a very political statement.
But I don't know. Maybe John can comment on this. It seems like I see what Greg's saying, but it seems like there may be a more with this particular topic, maybe even more silence than would normally be warranted. Even on forums, you've seen, or at least people have been complaining about having Gamergate threads shut down. So what's your take?
Okay, it depends on the website we're talking about, because the censorship on Reddit, I think, is fairly ridiculous. And I remember that it actually all started with something that I said when this thing first began, which I still stand by as being a pretty damn neutral assessment of what was going on, because a huge number of people were asking me about this subject, and I felt beholden to my viewers to answer it at least to some degree and explain what was going on. And I said in that twit longer, which is posted all over the internet, it's easy to find, that if Zoe Quinn did this, then I condemn that behavior, and here's why. I actually focus more on if journalists did this, I condemn that behavior, because that seemed to me that could be a systemic problem as opposed to what Zoe Quinn supposedly did. And I actually focused on the DMCA more than anything else. I had no real concern to anyone's relationship drama, whatever that might be. That's really none of my business. And I focused on the journalistic standpoint. It got posted to Reddit.
But you keep mentioning it. Just throwing it out there. Like, I think both you and Eric have mentioned Zoe Quinn like 4 or 5 times. Like, she doesn't matter, but we keep bringing her up.
The only reason I brought her up is because it's important to understand where the movement started from and where it's got to right now. And I'm talking about the comment that I made basically on day 1 in Ground Zero. And I don't believe publicly I've ever mentioned Zoe Quinn again, actually.
Okay, good.
I feel that the issues are far beyond anything involving that, but everything has a source, right? Everything has its roots somewhere. But the point that I was trying to make is that when that was posted to Reddit, 37,000 comments were made on that thread, and every single last one of them was deleted by Reddit moderators. It was a graveyard. I've never seen a graveyard that large on Reddit, ever, in terms of comments. And that seemed to start a trend of, we will not accept any posts regarding this issue or anything even tangent, I can't even use that word, even related to it by any kind of tangent. And we saw a lot of comment sections shut down. We saw a lot of forums removing discussion. Whereas, I'm happy to see that the Escapist didn't, even if, people in the Escapist don't agree with a lot of what's being said. Mm-hmm. And I think it's maybe the worst thing to do when you shut down that discussion, because all you do is you feed the fire of suspicion.
Yes.
Because let's be honest, what was this aimed at? If we're talking about journalistic ethics, and then we're asking journalists to investigate journalistic ethics, which they themselves may be implicated in. And then we see a large number of articles come out within the 24-hour period that all effectively deflect the issue and say gamers are dead. Then all that does is it feeds the fires of suspicion. It's like, what are you afraid of talking about? And I think that's the image that a lot of these sites are giving off right now. That's a huge PR problem for them, and they need to be very cautious about doing that, and they need to look at themselves and say, hang on a minute, why is this still going on, and did we have something to do with it?
Were you going to say something, Janelle?
No, I was just agreeing with him. I'm a big proponent of discussion and free speech and being able to talk and have a platform for that. And, I think a lot of sites did nothing but fuel the fires when they shut down discussions. And I don't know why they did it. I don't work at all these other sites, right? So too hard to moderate. It could have been because it was a topic they didn't want to have on their site. Either way, I think it did a disservice to all of their readers and the people who go on their sites to have these discussions, because it fueled any sense of conspiracy. It fueled any thoughts of wrongdoing. And I mean, in one sense, it grew the movement, which for the positives is a great thing. But on the other hand, removing areas for people to discuss it when your site has those areas available, I think was a bad choice.
Yeah.
Well, I think it comes also down to, what I was mentioning earlier, where when they did stand up and make, write those articles that John was as mentioned, the gamers are dead articles, and they did. It was odd, I will agree, that they came out all within this 24 to 48 hour period. But I think that was, for many of them, they were like, wow, we did fuel the fire, and probably the best thing is now to be quiet and not fuel the fire anymore. But again, I don't want to. I'm getting too speculative, and I think this is something I want to touch on based on what both of you just said. Is that the speculative nature of wanting to be, connect the dots of things that they perceive and creating a narrative behind those, seemingly unrelated events. It seems to be a large portion of what the discussion has happened over the last, month and a half. People are grabbing at facts that is publicly available, yes, and creating a story that suits their own political agendas or their agendas within this thing. And I'm not, everybody is guilty of this. Everybody does do this. It's what makes us human to a certain extent, is to see, data points and create a story from them. But that's happening to an extreme. I'll tell you one example where someone told me about, I won't go into the specifics, but they were basically talking about, this person was on the board for this thing, and this person had this connection, and they were at GDC together, and this person was here, and it was 3,000 words, and I said, what that sounds like is a network of professionals who like and working together. What you're describing is business. You're describing how people operate in society, and to put meaning behind that as if they were, colluding or working to push, their own agenda. I mean, I kind of don't. It has happened so much and so often in the Gamergate hashtag that I start to question whether that suspicion is the best way we should move forward.
I would like to say that I think a lot of that comes down to what I mentioned earlier. We're asking journalists to investigate journalists, and when they fail to do that, people that don't have journalistic training and are really not all that good at this had to take up the mantle, because the narrative that they were receiving from some journalists, the whole gamers are dead thing, was unacceptable to them. And I agree that a lot of people connected dots that aren't really dots at all, and there aren't really any connections there. But I think that's what happens when you circle the wagons rather than invite people to the table.
Yeah.
And I think it's an obvious reaction to that, and that means that mistakes are going to end up being made. And yeah, you'll get 3,000 words of something that's kind of an obvious conspiracy theory or based on something a little bit ridiculous. And that's egged on by, when we have people like Breitbart's reporters kind of getting involved in it as well. But was it inevitable that a third party who was not really involved in gaming sort of decided to step in, because the games media that we've relied on for really decades to defend us against the mainstream media, who take every possible chance they can get to blast gamers and games as a medium, when those people sort of fail to address the concerns that gamers have, someone steps in, right?
Right. That's a really good point, and something that we internally here at The Escapist have talked about, as when I just like writing news stories on The Escapist that are about news. You know what I mean? Like there becomes an inside baseball kind of aspect of things where
because a lot of it's just press releases that get sent to us by the PR companies, right?
Yeah, and it's also game journalists writing about other game journalists is kind of boring, except for a specific group of people that care about these issues. So it's important for the people in the Gamergate hashtag. They've demonstrated that. But I think for the larger gaming readership, it's less important. So they'd much rather hear about a new game coming out rather than what so and so did at so and so outlet, and wasn't that shitty that he didn't have to buy the drink that the PR guy got him. Like that's not our jobs to a certain extent, is not to report on the goings on of game journalism. Now, what you mentioned though was a third party that should have that ability, and in other press outlets other than gaming, there is the ombudsman. There is a actual certified expert who reviews the practices of a newspaper or a magazine or a website and sees if it passes the ethical test, the ethical standards, and is a third party. And I think it's actually, you have to become licensed as an ombudsman. You can't just call yourself an ombudsman. You have to, it's like a bar association or something where you have to pass a test in order to do it. And we've been talking about, perhaps game journalism should have something like that. Maybe we should have a third party person to talk about these things and discuss these issues, and I think YouTubers would want that as well, with all of the controversy that's come up.
But you can't blame people, right? And this is sort of my stance on this. You can't blame people for thinking there's a conspiracy or cahoots or whatever you want to call it when there are journalists out there in the game industry who are reporting on the private lives of people for whatever reason, aka we're going to report that there was harassment for Zoe Quinn or whatever the issue is, and then go stark silent when it comes to other game journalists. That's weird. And I think it's a very natural reaction for people to want to know, why are certain people's personal lives and what they do in their profession, how they act in their profession on the table, but when it comes to other people in the industry, it's off limits and you don't talk about it. That kind of stuff would automatically make anyone suspicious. And I don't think it's that hard. I mean, I'm a lawyer. In the legal industry, lawyers police other lawyers. There's a system for it. It's very efficient. Now, that's a totally different system, right? But there's nothing stopping a journalist from reporting on something wrong that another journalist did in the industry when you are very capable and very willing to report on any other individual, whether it be a dev, a CEO, some snafu he said, or, it just seems weird. And I can see how that seems weird to people.
Right, yeah. and I think it gets even more weird or suspicious when you have Breitbart reporting on the Game Journal Pros mailing list, which I know, Greg, you're a part of that. I mean, even I had no idea that existed until that was published. And honestly, reading over the emails I did see, I thought, well, this looks more like a conversation rather than collusion. But there was pressure from certain journalists to you, Greg, and to others to silence discussion on certain topics. And that looks, I mean, frankly, that looks pretty horrible. I mean, it made me nervous. It made me wonder about things that had happened previously, controversies I've been involved in. It made me wonder if there was some coordination going on, behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of. Well, I've been in Twitter fights where I've been kind of under some heat from numerous people all at once. And that at that time, it made me wonder, when I found out about Game Journal Pros, I wondered, whoa, like, what are these people saying behind the scenes? I'm sure other people who are even less connected, are even more curious as to what's going on.
Well, to be clear, I solicited those people's opinions in that thread. I was unsure of how I was going to proceed, and I actively asked them what they thought. So I don't condemn anyone who responded with their own opinions in that thread at all. As I said, I disagreed with some of their conclusions, but I thank them for what they said, and I don't think anything was wrong or done wrong, or there was no collusion from my perspective at all within that thread at all. But what you're talking about, Eric, is like, do other game journalists talk to other game journalists?
Not necessarily do they talk to one another. I mean, obviously they do. But I think that in the light of all these gamers are over articles coming out all at once, which I still think is an echo chamber, personally. But in light of all those articles, in light of the radio silence, in light of kind of what Janelle was talking about a moment ago, then you have this list with a bunch of different journalists from a bunch of different websites discussing we don't know what. I mean, I think that's the issue. I don't know what's being said. Nobody knows, and so that again leads to doubt and suspicion. Does that make sense?
There was
John?
there were a couple of things that I saw in those emails. I mean, some of them mentioned me, but that really wasn't all that important. The really strange part that I found is that some of these journalists seemed unaware of the wall that's supposed to be between the journalist and the subject. And there was a particular set of actions that were being encouraged there that I found to be just anti-journalistic in general. Like they were unethical from a journalistic standpoint, and I was not the only one to think that. Mike Futter from Game Informer was listed on there saying he didn't want to be associated with this. It feels wrong to me. It feels very off to reach across the fence from journalist to subject in this way. Professional distance, and it seems that some people certainly do have this idea, but I think that the lack of professional distance does tie into quite a lot of what seems to have been going on here. And there were efforts, it would seem, to have a coordinated response of some description that I feel does go beyond the whole, we're just going to discuss this as colleagues. But then again, I'm also the sort of person that really believes in competition. Like, if I was in that list, I'd probably be at their throats because, frankly, you know, we're all fighting for a piece of a fairly small pie here when it comes to talking about video games rather than just being, say, PewDiePie and screeching at Goat Simulator. We all wish we could be so lucky. But
Shots fired.
He knows exactly what I think of him. He is well aware of that. Felix is kind of cool, even if I don't like his work. But yeah, it does seem a little bit weird to see that, doesn't it?
Well, what I think is kind of hard for people who were not involved in that email discussion to see because of how it has been reported. And how only certain segments of those things have been reported, that it was a discussion. As you said, it was not a treatise or like, hey, this is what we're going to do, and if you don't get involved, you're going to be angry. It was merely a discussion, and the discussion ended with, yeah, this is a bad idea. And I wish that more people took that conclusion and read the whole entire email thread and realized that collectively, everyone kind of. I mean, I didn't even after my involvement, I didn't talk about the potential to reach across the aisle and speak to Zoe Quinn really at all. But like, I felt that the right call was made through discussion, you know, and people are obviously. This is a sad fact of game journalism. I work in an office. I actually have people I interact with on a personal level, you know, on a daily basis. Many in the game journalism profession do not. They live by them, you know, work from home. You know, John, you've got a studio there. Other people only interact with people online, right? And
I have a house. It's awesome. I don't have to live in San Francisco, so I get to live in something that's not a box. It's brilliant.
Which is awesome. That's great. But many people don't. And so they don't have the ability to just walk outside the office and be like, hey, what do you think about this? That is what that email list was for a lot of people, was the ability to go out and just get you know, a brainstorm with colleagues, you know, and so I think it's important to note that the right, you know, journalistic ethical choice was made by that group, and I got very upset with how they were being portrayed by people in the Gamergate hashtag as like, oh, everyone else is crazy except for Greg and Mike Futter, and I was like, that's not really what happened, and you're not really understanding the full picture. And again,
how could they? They don't have access to that information, right? I mean, all we really have is an incomplete thread. I don't think that thread wasn't. You can maybe confirm this. Let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I imagine that thread was longer than 9 emails long, right?
Because yes, I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to.
All I have here is 9 emails. You know, that's all that was put out publicly. So that's really all that it can be based on, unfortunately.
And that's what's frustrating about how it was reported. Yes. But yeah, this is me. Well, this is me.
So
you telling me the information that like this is what it was like.
But then why? My question, and I think it's very fair for people, you know, on the outside looking in, to see what's reported and make conclusions, and then ask, if that's not true, if that's not the full story, why aren't the people involved reporting on it as well? And I'm not saying that that's what should happen, and I'm not, but at some level you have to understand that why people would jump to conclusions and not understand why the full story is not revealed.
Mm-hmm.
It also happens when you have a lot of people just taking to Twitter to snark about it. And I notice this happens all the time. A lot of people in the industry, when they hear about something like this, they'll snark. A lot of people that I greatly respect, even Jeff Gerstmann, for instance, who pretty much has been my idol for a very, very long time. I based a lot of what I do and my opinions on how he acted, and when the GameSpot Gerstmann Gate thing went down, I found it to be just the most abhorrent thing I'd ever heard when it came to games. In fact, I blame that for my cynicism that I hold now. But even someone like Jeff Gerstmann likes to snark on Twitter about things like this every once in a while. And I think that the problem with Twitter is it's simultaneously the best and the worst place in the world to vent, because it feels great when you get out there and you say something like that. And then you realize, oh, shit, I just said that to 35,000 people, didn't I? And people are going to take this the wrong way. And, oh, what have I done? And it's almost like, strangely enough, we actually have a group for YouTubers, and we call it the support group. And you know what? All we do is we complain about YouTube comments and Google in it. And we sometimes play video games together, and that's really about it. We don't use it to organize anything. In fact, one of the base rules is, like, don't use this to ask about promoting other people's work and things like that. We have a set of ground rules. It's just a bunch of people together. And it's almost like, I think that helps us heat sink a lot of these problems. And maybe, as you were mentioning, Greg, earlier, people don't have those kind of contacts to be able to just vent. And they decide to take it out publicly, and it is taken as offensive by a lot of people because, well, the snark was designed to offend people in the first place, wasn't it?
Yes. No.
Of course, that's why it's snarky.
Yeah, it comes off as dismissive.
Yeah, and you can really, I think that's also part of a good thing to mention here is that Twitter has been the place where the majority of this controversy has played out.
Yes.
And I think that is something that we should recognize and see that, by definition, a 140-character statement is going to be taken out of context, because it's very difficult, as someone who writes tweets, to encapsulate an entire well-thought idea in that short of a span. So you have people who are building on each other and having a discussion and having these great meld of ideas happen. But you take one little sliver out of that, and that guy's an asshole, or that girl is, reacting really poorly, or that person had a really bad day, so they said something they may regret. But that is suddenly shown as, the character-damaging and career-ending stuff, and I don't know if that's really good either. I mean, I don't know.
So I'm going to just step in really quickly here, move away from Twitter a little bit, because we only have about 12 minutes. Just in terms of, all right, so kind of to sum up a little of what's been said, there's a lot of perception here of silence on the part of a lot of game journalists and publications. There's some bad PR from the Game Journo pros list. There are the hosts are over, gamers are dead articles, and then there's a history as well, I think, going back years in terms of a hostility between gamers and game critics or game journalists. I think back to the Mass Effect controversy. I don't know. There's been quite a few. So it seems to continue happening, and that says to me that there are some underlying problems that are just not being addressed. In terms of trust, in terms of ethics, in terms of communication. How do you guys see this? How do you see this playing out going forward? And is there any sort of solution? Is there any way to make things better?
I mean, I think dialing down the militarism is a very, very good idea. If we could stop comparing gamers or those involved in the Gamergate hashtag to ISIS, that would be great.
Oh my God, yes, please.
That would be and this is not the first. It's not just today that I saw that happening. The whole idea of comparing people to murderous, mass rapist, terrorist organizations is abhorrent, disgusting, and you should be goddamn ashamed of yourself if you do it.
Yes.
All you are looking to do if you do that is poison the well. You are impressing nobody with that. And, well, actually, that's not true. You are impressing some people, and those are exactly the kind of people you don't want to be impressing with such extremist rhetoric. And it's extremism that encapsulates the problem with this discussion. Move away from extremism, move towards issue-based discussion. Take this rhetoric out, focus on what we can deal with and what we can improve, focus on listening to people and accepting that there are different points of view that we may very well disagree with, sometimes very, very strongly, but that doesn't mean we get to shove people in a box. We don't get to claim, this person is conservative, so all of her views are invalid, which, again, is something that we saw several sites indulge in. That's pretty damn disgusting, frankly. You know, the conservative is not a dirty word, liberal is not a dirty word. That's nonsense. Let's not do that. Let's grow up a little bit. And again, focus on the issues at play and marginalize the extremists and starve them of oxygen.
I can't agree more with you. I mean, at some point, we all need to step back, look at what's going on, and just recognize that we need to stop being children and come to the table together to work on improving. Look, we all love games. We all love playing games, and that's why we're all doing what we are doing, whether it be working in the industry as a dev or a journalist, reading sites and reading reviews and critiques, whatever it is that reason that you're here, it's because we all love games. Let's grasp onto that, focus on that, and see how we can all come out of this for the better. There's clearly wrongs happening on all sides of the aisle. Let's work together to eliminate them and get rid of the vocal fanatic minority rhetoric that...
Oh no, did you break your mic?
Yeah. I think Janelle just...
will be back momentarily.
I'm going to just jump in real quick.
Positive light for everybody.
Oh, there we go.
No, you're back.
Okay. We lost you for a second there, Janelle.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Not your fault. Absolutely not.
I wonder...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to... See, I mean, that all sounds great. I mean, everybody sounds great with, saying that we need to get rid of the militant rhetoric and all of that, but, I mean, how is the question? Like, we have right now, I look back at the last month or so, and basically from the Gamers Are Over articles on, there has been literally no peacemaking whatsoever. I mean, nobody who wrote those articles is coming out and saying, that they were wrong. They're being completely vilified and demonized now, and entire publications are as well, by people who took offense to them, and you can't blame them necessarily. I just don't see. I guess I'm at a loss, honestly. Like, well, I don't know how you come forward and say Gamers Are Over, you're done, and then how do you go from there? Like, what do you do?
Well, those are the opinions. Those are the opinions of the individuals that wrote those articles, right? I mean, to a certain extent, I don't support the idea that someone wrote something I didn't like. Let's call up that site's advertisers and get everyone at that site fired. That is not the right choice to make. And I think that is not a way to have a discussion. I think in some ways it is the censorship that we saw at sites like Reddit and other things. You're basically trying to silence voices. And I see it happen with Anita Sarkeesian and her videos. I see it happen with anyone who puts forth an opinion that is unpopular or is something that you disagree with. And sometimes the reaction I see is someone saying, be quiet, you shouldn't say that. And what we are saying, I think all three of us on this panel, and I think you too, Eric, are saying, you can't have a discussion by ceasing other voices. You have to allow other people to have opinions, realize that they have an opinion that you may disagree with, that you probably do disagree with. You can't go through life without disagreeing with people. It's how you disagree with someone that is very important. So, you asked how do we stop, bile and hatred in games, in the culture that we see. When you see it happen, tell it to stop. Tell that person to stop. If you see someone, say something vile in a comment, and I've been doing this on Twitter, and I'll tell you, it actually does. I mean, I don't have the followings that John has, but when I tell someone that I don't appreciate that behavior, they stop. They will stop. 9 times. Sometimes you'll get, you know, a worse reaction, and you know, that's part of the courage of telling someone to cease that behavior. But that's how you do it. You say, I
think we have I think one of the problems. I mean, I agree with you. You do have to engage in order to get people to stop acting in particular ways. I mean, I don't get a lot of abuse really from anybody, but every now and then I get in a fight with somebody, and I usually just try to engage with them. It seems to work pretty well. But there's also this question of like asymmetric power, asymmetric megaphones. You've got, on the one hand, Gamergate hashtag, which is a cacophony of voices. It's tons and tons of people, but no one really, or not very many people with a very loud voice. And then on the other hand, you have people with, you know, pretty high pedestals, and I'm not seeing. I mean, here we have several people engaging. You would maybe say from a more neutral standpoint or whatever. I think that's kind of not really very accurate. But you have people engaging, and you don't have other people engaging. And I feel like what is the next step? When are we going to see people engaging and not just vilifying? Because I don't see any way to move forward unless people actually do come out and talk about it. This has to be discussed.
Yeah,
or it's going to keep going.
Yeah, and I'd like to take the opportunity to disagree with Greg's point of view when it comes to the idea of boycott and the idea of, say, pulling ads and actually emailing advertisers. My perspective on this is a little bit different because I operate a lot in the esports scene, and I've run an esports team for the last couple of years, and I've been involved in the pro StarCraft scene for 5. And emailing sponsors when players behave in a particularly bad way is actually very common. And it's a fairly accepted way of people doing business. Now, when it comes to a larger industry such as this, we have this idea of asymmetry, we have this idea of consumer power, and the few things that a consumer can actually do, because a consumer doesn't have a very loud voice versus a website like, say, Polygon that has a very loud voice because they have a large audience. They have a pedestal and a megaphone, one might say. That's a term that's been bandied around a lot. They have a megaphone. So when their concerns are not addressed and when people refuse to engage with them, as Eric was mentioning earlier, the way to diffuse a lot of this is to engage with people, they will resort to one of the few powers that they have as a consumer, which is the idea of the boycott. And it's to say, look, we, advertiser, we are part of your demographic. This website is representing you, because that's how sponsorship works. When I speak, I represent the sponsors of my esports team, whether I like it or not. And I have to always bear that in mind whenever I say anything. So as a result, we don't like what's being said here. Here are the reasons why. And we feel this is of concern. Now, Intel obviously believed that it was of enough concern to pull an advertising campaign from one website. One, I might add. You know, that's not actually that many. Intel sponsor a great deal of things. And I actually quite like Gamasutra. I think that pretty much 99% of what's written on Gamasutra is fantastic, and I engaged with Mike Rose quite recently in a discussion about indie games and things like that, and he wrote great analysis, and he was a fantastic guest on our show. Love to speak to him again. But I do not agree with the idea that a boycott is censorship. I believe that that's consumer activism, because it's really one of the few weapons that you have when you try and address these people and you try and post your concern on the website, that concern is deleted and you're banned from the site, and discussion is it's almost like boycott became a last resort because they weren't able to have a voice, and this is the only way that some people could think of doing it.
Well, yeah. I don't think there's any. Sorry, I do have to just. I just want to respond to you, John, and then I have to run, and I apologize for that for leaving the discussion in the middle of this. But I just want to respond to what you were saying, and saying that yes, it is a weapon, and it is the only weapon they have. But like any weapon, it can be misused. And I think that while you can disagree with a particular essay, or you can disagree with the Gamers Are Dead article, I think that there are many people at that publication that would suffer the consequences for that disagreement. I don't think it's necessarily a valid way to get your point across simply because you disagreed with one article that was written on one website. Does the website as a whole need to suffer from that whole thing? I don't know. I mean, and obviously there are people who feel strongly enough where that would be a case. I'm not saying I condemn that behavior. I just think, think about it, whether or not that is the right choice to make, because there are very real people with livelihoods at stake.
Oh yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, I've led boycotts of companies before, and I've had to consider the same thing actually with things like BioWare. Not that I think that my boycott of BioWare made much difference, but that video still had 1 million views on it. And yeah, I mean, I've met people from BioWare, and I like them a lot, but ultimately, it's consumer first. In my honest opinion, that's always going to be my concern, because they're the ones who basically gave me this career. And I think that consumers have the most to lose in an industry which is rife with kind of corruption on all levels. And we talk about the publisher agreements. Recently was put out on your website right now, the wonderful Jim Sterling, who I love very much, perhaps in ways that he does not yet know. Made fantastic comments on the Jimquisition today about the agreement that Plaid Social put out with Shadow of Mordor.
Right.
And that's the sort of thing that consumers kind of need to be protected from. And I think that the line of defense is pretty damn thin. And when consumers feel that the guys who are backing them up against Jack Thompson have now sort of turned the other way, they feel extremely alienated, and they react really in the only way that they know how.
Right. I do agree with that, and again, sorry, I do have to duck out. So thank you so much, Eric, for organizing this. I would love to do something like this again.
Absolutely, yeah.
Want to do something. So this was a good discussion, and like I said, I think these kind of discussions need to happen more often. So please count me in for that.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I can keep going on if Eric.
I've got a few more minutes. If you
I can keep going if you want to go.
Yeah, I'm totally.
I have about. I can go about 15 more minutes, and then I actually do have to leave.
Okay.
But yeah, let's keep it up.
But yeah, why not?
Okay, Janelle, did you want to jump in on any of that?
Well, I mean, I wanted to say that, in my opinion, there's a very clear line between what is because this is what I've gotten out of the conversation. There's a very clear line between what is harassment and what is, using the tools within your ability to have your voice heard. And I think, when you get to a point where you are actively doing something to an individual, right, because of something they said or their views, where you are blowing them up their Twitter feed with negativity, Twitter or something on a social media aspect that you wouldn't do in person, right? There's a level where you can reach harassment. You wouldn't get a mob together and call someone's phone 24/7 to constantly send them terrible, harassing messages on their phone, which people have done before in other areas.
Yeah.
So why would you do that on Twitter, right? That's clear harassment. Look at what your actions are. Check yourself, right? But I have to agree, boycotting, in my mind, is one of the best ways to get your voice heard. And if some person, or I don't know, if some product distributor like Xbox, right? If Xbox is making a product that you don't like and is hurting gamers, don't fucking buy an Xbox. And you know what? Stop talking about it too. And I believe the same power should go to people for boycotting sites and journalists. If you don't like what's being said, stop listening to them. Stop clicking on their articles. Stop going to their site. And if part of that is letting advertisers know what's going on, I think that's well within the rights of the consumer, and the consumer should have that ability and power. That's not harassment at all.
Right.
Yeah, it's about kind of being. I think from the perspective of someone that has far too many Twitter followers, far more than I deserve. It's really easy to see a torrent of tweets coming your way, and I think the natural human reaction to that is to be very reductive and try and boil it down to its core essence, which often completely misses the point, because what you often get is you get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people with a lot of different agendas and a lot of different ideas, but it can be very easy to bundle it all together and say, oh God, I'm being harassed. There is clear, real harassment that happens. And
Yes.
there is clear, real harassment that happens towards women in the industry. There is not even a question about that. It happens towards men. It happens towards women in a different way. I had a great discussion with a couple of, I believe they were self-identified feminists yesterday on the subject, and we talked a little bit about academic feminist theory and the way that gender identity works for men versus gender identity for women. The idea that gender identity for women can be more of an attack vector for women than it can be for men. And I don't pretend to understand all that stuff. You know, I did law. I didn't do that stuff. I'm just going to bow to the experts on that. But I think that if you bundle all of that together, then you do a disservice to the entire discussion, and that includes the idea of harassment against women, or even the more basic issues that seem to plague our industry. Why is it that we don't see enough women in STEM fields? And as a result, we get a lopsided kind of gender gap in the games industry because we don't have women in STEM fields. I'd love to have that discussion. I'd love to have all sorts of discussions about the way that female characters are portrayed within video games. This would all be great. But right now it seems like we can't have that discussion, and we haven't been able to have that discussion because we keep giving too much attention to extremists on whatever side, and we don't focus on issues.
Yeah, and there's extremists in every group is what I feel like people are forgetting. This is not some random phenomenon that's happening with Gamergate, and therefore Gamergate needs to be vilified, or the other side needs to be vilified, or any of that stuff. You always have to realize that there are extremists in every sort of movement like this, and you need to localize them and choose. Do you want the extremists to speak for your side, or do you want to rise above that, silence those voices, and take control of your movement and make it what you need to make it? And those are choices that people need to start making now and figuring out how to move forward in a positive light.
Yeah, I think also thinking back, I mean, thinking about the boycott, like I've written about that recently, and to me, it's not the ideal outcome of all of this. I would prefer to see everyone engage more, but it is one of the only consumer tools available. You saw a similar thing with Mass Effect, with Hold the Line, and with this response from consumers. Consumers only have so much they can do, and that's consumers of media and of products. And I think that I really do think that things like boycotts can be avoided by, you know, whether it's a game publisher or a game publication. They can be avoided by better communication and engagement with the customers.
Listening and believing, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, you can't listen to. I mean, not everyone's going to be. You can't. There's good, like everyone's saying. There's going to be the extremists. There's going to be the people who say crazy things, horrible things. But really, when you look through and you listen to kind of the what is sensible and what is more, you know, the medium there, the median. I think that's extremely valuable. And I think that it can avoid the worst outcomes, not just the higher levels of toxicity, but also things like companies pulling ads and so forth.
It should be noted that ad revenue is a privilege, not a right.
Mm-hmm.
You gain sponsors by properly representing those sponsors. Again, back to the esports analogy, teams get sponsors dropped because they lose, you know, or because their player does something stupid. This happens constantly. Sponsors are switching. Actually, the sponsors are very unstable within the esports industry, and we see a lot of that happening on a much, much shorter timeline. And if I think, can we stop treating Intel like idiots? Like, Intel are a huge company that are not going to be intimidated, if this is to be believed, by a tiny little group of anonymous morons, if the narrative is to be believed. They're not scared by that.
It's ridiculous to think such a major corporation that's been around for so long, there's huge teams of very intelligent people working there, have made a decision based on, quote-unquote, a few loud voices harassing them or sending them into silence and pulling their advertising. That would be ridiculous. It's important to note that whenever an advertiser advertises anywhere in any form, there's brand association going on there, and they're committing their brand identity, their brand loyalty, everything that comes with that, with association to the people they advertise with. And if that association goes negatively, it is completely reasonable for a company to make a decision like Intel made.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with it. You know, from my personal perspective, it kind of sucks because, like I said, I like reading Gama Sutra a lot, and I think most of what Gama Sutra puts out is really, really damn good. And it's a site that provides very useful services within the industry, and it's one of those weird crossover sites where it's read by, I'd say, kind of more hardcore, invested enthusiast gamers as well as industry people. And I was trying to explain that to a few people on Twitter from the industry. It's like, this isn't a consumer site, so why are you concerned? No, it is. You know, I don't think you understand the depth of interest that a lot of consumers actually have in this industry. And I think that if you looked at your demographics, you'd probably understand that a little more. You know, if we can get almost 200,000 people listening to a 3-hour blithering session about Steam discoverability on YouTube, then we can safely say there's a lot of people that are really interested in this subject, and they want to discuss things, and they want to be treated like adults, and that's maybe the key component, isn't it? Treat them like children, alienate them. These are not 12-year-olds that are yelling on the internet. These are grown individuals that are absolutely smart enough to make their own decisions and will not be misled by some nonsense. And they don't want to be treated like they are just being led on by some shadowy 4chan conspiracy. The 4chan always the boogeyman, isn't it? It's like, it's a forum. It's not the Illuminati. Come on, it's a forum where people shitpost. That's what happens.
All right. I think I'm just going to wrap this one up for today. I wanted to thank you guys for coming on. I think it's been a really good conversation in a sea of no conversations. So I'd like to do it again sometime, and I am planning on having I'm planning on having other people on as well, and making this a series, looking at this from as many perspectives as possible, including hopefully some non-writer, non-industry people, and maybe some developers as well. And of course, on Twitter or wherever, people can send me suggestions, as you have been doing this entire time. And so thank you again. If there's anything anyone wants to add before we go offline, now is your time.
I just want to thank everyone for joining us and being part of this discussion. I have had a fabulous time talking to all you wonderful people and reading the chat as we've been talking. Please continue to follow all of us on Twitter to continue the conversation, because the more we are able to sit down and talk like adults about this, the better it will be for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone who's watched. Absolutely.
I'd love to give just a quick shout out to the Fine Young Capitalists and say congratulations for hitting your goal there. That was a movement, that was a project specifically designed to allow women who were not able to build games on their own because they didn't have the programming skills to do so, to get their ideas into a full product. And that is just a wonderful thing. And those that supported it are putting their money where their mouth is, and I think that proves fairly strongly that while there may be some very loud extremist voices on all sides of the discussion, that basically we're dealing with pretty cool people, and we should remember that video games are cool, and the people that play video games are often also cool, and they don't really like being condemned for their hobby. They never have. And it doesn't matter who's doing it. They don't like it whenever it happens.
All right.
Yeah, can we throw out our Twitters out there real quick to everybody? Yeah. So I'm so sleepy, S0OSLEPI. Follow me and let's talk about this some more. I'd be really interested.
Yeah. And everybody's Twitter is also is going to be in the video description. This will go up on my YouTube channel. And I'll send it out.
Fantastic. Yeah. If you wish to follow me, my name's TotalBiscuit. I make no promises of quality. Just going to put that out there. Especially lately. Especially when the cider is involved. Oh, God. Oh, dear.
Well, I make no promises for anything, so you're all screwed.
All right. Well, thank you again. Let's keep talking about this in a positive way. I think this was really cool. So we'll do it again soon.
I hope so.
All right. Take care.
Pew pew.
Goodbye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Ciao.